They called me lowlife after I made them rich, so I vanished. That question. 7 years had passed, but I could still feel the chill of it, the way it hung in the air of that cavernous, sun-drenched living room. It was the first weapon drawn in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. "And what is it your family does exactly?" Eleanor Vance had asked, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble floors beneath my worn-out flats. The emphasis was a stiletto heel on the word does, designed to pin me to a specimen board for examination. I was a curiosity Leo had brought home from the other side of the tracks, and his mother was the lead entomologist. Our world, Leo's and mine, had been simple before that day. It was shared textbooks in chemistry class, stolen kisses behind the bleachers, and long drives in his beat-up sedan, the one his parents hated. My world was Millfield, a town that smelled of rust and hard work, where my father's shift whistle from the factory was our dinner bell, and my mother came home with hands raw from cleaning other people's houses. It was a life of making do, of turning thrift store finds into fashion, of knowing the precise value of $1 because we saw so few of them. My hand instinctively went to the small antique silver locket at my throat, a constant weight against my skin. It was my grandmother's, the only fine thing she'd ever owned, and it felt like an anchor to my own reality in this alien atmosphere. The Vance Mansion in Sterling Hills wasn't just a house, it was a declaration. Manicured lawns rolled out like a green carpet leading to a home so vast it seemed to inhale the sunlight. Inside, the silence was different from the quiet of my small home. Theirs was a wealthy, heavy silence, punctuated only by the distant chime of a grandfather clock and the clink of ice in tall glasses. Eleanor Vance presided over it all, a queen in her cashmere kingdom. Her gaze swept over me, once a dismissive appraisal that took in my $5 dress and homemade jewelry, and I knew I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The family dynamics were a carefully choreographed dance. Leo, my wonderful, earnest Leo, was a nervous but proud bridge, holding my hand so tightly his knuckles were white as he tried to connect his two worlds. He'd talk about my little bracelet-making business with a pride that was almost heartbreaking. "She's got a real head for it, Mom. An entrepreneur." Eleanor would just smile that smile that never reached her eyes. How industrious. His siblings, Sophie and Julian, were polite ghosts, offering limp handshakes and murmured pleasantries, their eyes darting to their mother for cues. They were satellites in her orbit. Only Richard Vance, the patriarch, broke rank. He was a self-made man, a successful attorney, who still had the calluses of his own climb on his soul. While Eleanor was appraising my pedigree, he looked me in the eye. He didn't ask what my father did. He asked what I wanted to do. "Ambition is a rare currency, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through his wife's chill. "Don't let anyone devalue it." It was a small kindness, but in that sterile environment, it felt like a lifeline. The early days of our relationship were a study in this class divide. Dates with Leo were my refuge, but Sunday dinners at Sterling Hills were my trial. The subtle insults were relentless, disguised as well-meaning advice. "Oh, you're not pursuing a degree. What a shame. A formal education provides such..." Polish Eleanor would muse, looking at my hands as if expecting to see grease under my fingernails. Or, "That's a very unique dress, dear." So, creative. Every comment was a perfectly aimed dart, meant to remind me that I didn't belong, that my presence in her perfect world was a temporary clerical error. I learned to swallow my retorts, to build a fortress behind a pleasant smile. For Leo. I did it all for Leo. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling brunch where Eleanor had spent 20 minutes dissecting the deplorable state of public schooling, Richard pulled me aside in the hallway as we were leaving. The scent of his expensive cologne and old books filled the air. He pressed a small, stiff business card into my palm, his fingers closing over mine for a brief, firm second. "A friend of mine. He invests in people, not pedigrees," he whispered, his eyes flicking down the hall toward the living room. "Don't let her grind you down, kid. She's afraid of anyone who isn't afraid of her." It was the first crack I'd seen in the Vance family's united front. A secret alliance. I clutched the card like a talisman all the way home. The culmination of this quiet hostility arrived, as it so often does, cloaked in celebration. Our engagement party, The Vance mansion was aglow, filled with people whose names were on buildings and charity wings. I felt like an actress who'd been given the wrong script, smiling and nodding as I navigated conversations about polo matches and summering in the Hamptons. Leo was radiant, his arm possessively around my waist, a man deeply in love and blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling around us. I slipped away to the powder room, needing a moment to breathe, to touch my locket and remember who I was. On my way back, I passed a small, dimly lit study. The door was ajar, and I heard her voice. Eleanor's. She was speaking to a woman whose diamond earrings were so large they seemed to defy gravity. "Oh, it's just a phase," Eleanor said, her laugh a brittle tinkling sound. "He's sowing his wild oats, I suppose, just with the wrong class of person, but he can't possibly be serious about it long term." The woman murmured something I couldn't hear. Eleanor's voice dropped, becoming even clearer, colder. "Please. A girl with no name and no future, he'll come to his senses. They always do." I stood frozen in the hallway, the champagne flute in my hand suddenly heavy. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just disapproval. It was a verdict. A prophecy. She had already written the end of our story. I turned away from the door, my hand instinctively going to my locket, its familiar shape a stark contrast to the cold dread filling my chest. Across the crowded room, I met Leo's smiling, oblivious eyes, and forced a smile of my own, a fragile, cracking thing. "No future?" I thought, the words echoing in the space where my heart used to be. "I'll build one myself. She'll see." But I had no idea that the path to that future would be paved with failures. She was already counting on struggles that would test the very foundation of the love I was so desperate to believe in. Proving Eleanor Vance wrong turned out to be a lot harder and a lot more expensive than I ever imagined. My defiant, silent vow at the engagement party, "I'll build one myself." She'll see collided with the harsh reality of rent bills and the crushing weight of expectation. The path to my future, it turned out, was paved with a spectacular number of failures. We got married in a small, beautiful ceremony at a local botanical garden, paid for with my parents' meager savings, and a contribution from the Vances that Eleanor made sure everyone knew the exact cost of. Then, we moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment that would have fit inside the Vances' master closet. Leo, bless his heart, never complained. He'd come home from his corporate job, loosen a tie that cost more than our weekly groceries, and eat the experimental dinners I'd concoct on our shoestring budget without a single grimace. He saw our life as an adventure. I saw it as a race against the clock of my own self-doubt. My first entrepreneurial attempt was born from homesickness and a sliver of hope, an Etsy store I called Millfield Treasures, where I sold handcrafted jewelry and painted wooden signs with sayings my grandmother used to love. I poured every spare hour into it, my fingers sore from twisting wire and stained with paint. But the vast anonymous marketplace swallowed me whole. For every one item I sold, a dozen other sellers sold 100. I was a tiny rowboat in an ocean of cargo ships, and soon I was spending more on shipping materials than I was making in profit. It quietly fizzled out, leaving me with boxes of unsold inventory and the bitter taste of my first failure. I didn't have time to mourn. I had to pivot. "Okay, not art," I told Leo one night, staring at our dwindling bank account. "Something practical." And so Millfield Dash was born, a local delivery service I ran out of my beat-up hatchback. I was the CEO, the dispatcher, and the entire delivery fleet. I ferried everything from legal documents to birthday cakes across town, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer desperation. I was starting to make a tiny bit of headway, even landed one big catering company as a regular client. And then they went bankrupt overnight, taking my last 3 unpaid invoices with them. My computer, my only real business asset, crashed the same week. The emergency fund we had was gone in an instant, spent on a replacement. I was defeated. "Maybe this is a sign, Leo," I whispered one night, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over. "Maybe I should just get a normal job. Maybe your mom is right." He pulled me close, his chin resting on the top of my head. "No. This is just part of the journey, Clara. Every successful person has a list of failures a mile long. The difference is they don't quit. You don't quit." His belief was the only thing keeping me afloat, a solitary life raft in an ocean of Eleanor's condescension. That Christmas, sitting around the Vance's perfectly polished mahogany dining table, Eleanor chose her moment. With a voice dripping in feigned sweetness, she looked at me over her crystal wine glass. Have you thought about going back to school, dear? It's never too late to get some credentials. Before I could answer, she delivered the killing blow. After all, 2 failed businesses in 1 year isn't a track record. It's a warning sign. The table went quiet. Leo's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard. I swallowed my pride, a familiar metallic taste. I'm learning valuable lessons from each attempt, I managed to say. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Oh, I'm sure. But the main lesson, I think, is that some people are meant to be entrepreneurs and some people are meant to work for them. The drive home was a blur of Leo's furious apologies, but her words had lodged themselves deep inside me. Was she right? The breakthrough, when it came, wasn't a lightning strike, it was a quiet spark. A friend from high school, Maria, had poured her life savings into opening a small bakery. It was her dream, but the bakery was empty. I don't know what to do, Clara, she confessed over coffee, on the verge of tears. The cupcakes are good, but no one knows I'm here. Having nothing left to lose, I offered to help with her social media for free. But instead of just posting pictures of her food, I did something different. I told her story. I wrote about her grandmother's handwritten recipe book, the one with flour smudges on every page. I posted a video of her kneading dough before sunrise. I found the emotional heart of her business. The response was insane. The post went viral locally. Her sales doubled in a month, then tripled. Word spread. Suddenly, I had 3 other small business owners calling me asking for the same thing. They didn't want marketing. They wanted their story told. It was a light bulb moment. This was my talent. Finding the authentic connection between a business and its customers. It was something that couldn't be taught in a classroom. That night, I dug through my wallet and found the crumpled business card Richard had given me. My hands were shaking, but I smoothed it out. The next day, I made the call. Richard Vance suggested I get in touch. I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. Anyone Richard sends my way gets a meeting, the man on the other end said. Be here Tuesday. I named my new venture AuraForge Media. Our tiny apartment became my command center. I worked 16-hour days, fueled by a relentless drive to prove Eleanor wrong. I devoured every free article, every podcast, every YouTube tutorial on digital marketing, consumer psychology, and the emerging influencer economy. Leo would come home to find me still in my pajamas, glued to my computer screen, our spare closet converted into a makeshift office. 6 months in, I landed my first major client, the one Richard's friend had given me a shot with. It was a regional chain of fitness centers getting crushed by national brands. My campaign focused on raw, real transformation stories from their members. We created a community, not just a customer base. Their membership jumped 30% in 3 months. I was finally turning a real profit, more than a profit. Leo celebrated every tiny victory with me, but I was waiting for the big one. The one even Eleanor couldn't dismiss. And then it came. The fitness center thrilled with the results, signed a full-year, 6-figure contract. I held the signed paper in my hands, feeling its weight. It was more money than my father made in 2 years at the factory. It was real. It was happening. That Sunday, I went to the Vance dinner armed with my victory. When the conversation turned to my work, I took a deep breath. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. AuraForge just signed its first yearly contract. It's for 6 figures. A stunned silence fell over the table. Richard gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Leo was beaming. But Eleanor? Eleanor didn't even look at me. Her gaze was fixed on her son. And how much of that, she asked, her voice as cold as ice, will you have to use to bail her out when this little hobby collapses? The words hung in the air, a clear sign that my success wasn't a victory in her eyes. It was just a new declaration of war. Her hobby didn't collapse. It exploded. And that declaration of war she'd made over dinner, it became a cold war fought not with shouting matches, but with whispered requests and the silent rustle of my checkbook. In the 3 years that followed, AuraForge Media became a national powerhouse. What started in our spare closet grew to a team of 15, then 30, with a sleek office downtown, and clients whose names appeared on the sides of skyscrapers. My income didn't just surpass Leo's, it dwarfed it. We bought our first home, a beautiful 4-bedroom house, with a sprawling backyard in a nice neighborhood, a far cry from my parents' tiny house, but pointedly not in Sterling Hills. It was my one small act of defiance, a geographical boundary I insisted upon. I wanted a home, not a satellite estate. I had naively thought that success would be my shield, that it would finally earn me a seat at the table. Instead, it just made me the table's designated benefactor. The power dynamics in the Vance family didn't just shift, they inverted, and the whiplash left everyone resentful. The request for financial support started subtly. It began with Leo's sister Sophie, who had graduated with an expensive art history degree and was now facing a mountain of student loans and a barren job market. During one Sunday dinner, she tearfully explained how a prestigious art program in Paris was her dream, her one real shot, but it was impossibly out of reach. "We can help," I said instantly, a knee-jerk reaction born from a lifetime of knowing what it felt like to want something you couldn't have. Eleanor bristled her back, stiffening. "That's very generous, Clara, but the Vances do not accept charity." Her words were aimed at me, but her eyes were on her son. "It's not charity, Mom. It's family," Leo insisted, his voice firm. He was proud of me, proud of what we could do. But as I wrote the check later that week, a 5-figure sum that didn't even make a dent in my quarterly earnings, the moment felt exactly like a transaction. I was purchasing a temporary reprieve from disapproval. Sophie's gratitude was effusive, but I could see in her eyes that I had also become something other than her brother's wife. I was now her patron. A few months later, the stakes got higher. Leo's brother Julian was diagnosed with a rare medical condition that required specialized treatment. His top-tier insurance refused to fully cover. The out-of-pocket cost was staggering. There was no discussion, no family meeting. Leo came to me, his face pale with worry, and before he could even finish explaining, I was on my laptop transferring the $50,000. When Julian called, overwhelmed and trying to refuse, I simply said, "Family doesn't let family suffer when they can help." I meant it. Having grown up with so little, being able to alleviate someone's pain with a click of a button felt like a superpower. But to Eleanor, it was a threat. The look on her face when she learned of it was a complicated, ugly tapestry of emotions. There was relief, yes, but it was overshadowed by a burning resentment and a deep, rattling shame. I, the girl from Millfield, the uneducated upstart, had the power to save her son in a way she could not. My financial support had exposed her own vulnerability, and she would never forgive me for it. From that point on, her attacks evolved. The blunt instrument of my lack of education was replaced by the more sophisticated scalpel of my new money. I was no longer just uneducated, I was nouveau riche. "It's just wonderful what people can accomplish these days with all this internet business," she'd say to her friends at family gatherings, loudly enough for me to hear. No formal education required, it seems. At our housewarming party, she surveyed my carefully chosen decor and remarked, "You have to be careful with new money, dear. It can be so terribly loud." Every act of generosity was twisted into a sign of my desperation to belong. The first-class tickets to Europe for a family vacation were an ostentatious display. The down payment I funded for Sophie's first condo was me flaunting my success. I was trapped in a gilded cage of my own making. If I didn't offer financial help, I was selfish. If I did, I was a show-off desperately trying to buy my way into a family that would never truly accept me. The resentment was suffocating. What hurt most wasn't the ingratitude. It was the effect it was having on Leo. He was caught in the crossfire, torn between his genuine love for me and a lifetime of conditioning to appease his mother. He would be my biggest cheerleader in private, his eyes shining with pride at my accomplishments. But after a weekend with his family, he would become quiet and drain the light in his eyes, dimmed by the weight of their judgment. The tension culminated on a quiet Tuesday night. I was going over our finances, planning a new investment strategy for Auraforge when I saw it. A recurring charge, thousands of dollars a month for the Sterling Hills Country Club. I frowned. We weren't members. "Leo," I called out, my voice casual. "What's this charge for the country club?" He walked into the office, and I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes before he smoothed it over. "Oh, that. Must be a mistake. I'll call the bank." But he didn't move. He just stood there, unable to meet my gaze. My heart sank. It wasn't about the money. We had plenty. It was the secrecy. Leo, I said softly, my voice losing its casual edge. Look at me. Why have we been paying your parents' country club fees? He finally sighed, the fight going out of him. He confessed that his dad's investments had taken a huge hit a year ago, that they were embarrassed that they couldn't afford the dues anymore, but couldn't bear the thought of leaving the club. I set up the payment from our joint account, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to bother you with it. Bother me. The words felt small and inadequate. The hurt was a physical thing, a sharp pain in my chest. Why didn't you just tell me, Leo, we're a team? And that's when he delivered the line that would become a festering wound in our marriage. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a miserable, conflicted honesty. I didn't tell you, he said, the words costing him everything because Mom would be mortified if she knew the money came from you. His words hung between us, a chasm of everything left unsaid. Mortified. Not grateful, not relieved. Mortified. In that moment, I saw with blinding clarity that it didn't matter how many businesses I built or how many problems I solved with my success. To Eleanor Vance, I would always be the tainted source, the dirty money. For the first time, I saw that I was not just an outsider fighting to get in. I was the enemy, and my checkbook was my only weapon. And I realized this slow-burning war, this battle of family secrets and silent betrayals, was about to demand a final bloody battle. I had a feeling it was coming very, very soon. The final battle, the breaking point I had felt coming, arrived 2 weeks later, disguised as a celebration. Eleanor, in a rare gesture of magnanimity, had decided to throw a dinner party to commemorate Sophie's new job at a prestigious design firm, a position I knew she had only secured because of the Parisian program I had financed. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, choosing a tasteful but expensive designer dress and the simple pearl earrings Leo had given me for our anniversary. It felt like putting on armor. If I was going to walk into the lion's den, I might as well look the part. You look beautiful, Leo said, as we pulled into the familiar, perfectly lit circular driveway of the Vance mansion. Let's just try to enjoy tonight, I replied, squeezing his hand. This is for Sophie. The house was glittering, filled with the Vances' closest friends, a collection of old money families who all looked like they'd been born wearing loafers, and an expression of mild disappointment. Eleanor greeted us at the door, already a glass of white wine into her evening. She cooed over Leo, embracing him tightly while giving me a brief, dismissive nod. Everyone's in the living room, darling. Sophie is absolutely glowing. The evening started with a fragile peace. Sophie was indeed radiant, buzzing with excitement about her new career. To her credit, she was genuinely grateful. I honestly couldn't have done it without Clara, she told a small group of relatives, her eyes shining. She believed in me when I was ready to give up. Eleanor, refilling her wineglass for the third time, let out a laugh that was just a little too loud. Well, she certainly has the money to throw around these days, doesn't she? Though I'm sure your natural talent would have found a way regardless, sweetheart. The first shot had been fired. I saw Leo tense beside me. Richard gave his wife a brief cautionary look, which she ignored completely. By the time we were seated for dinner around the long candlelit table, Eleanor was visibly intoxicated. Her movements were exaggerated, her smile just a bit too wide, a bit too brittle. I braced myself. The conversation eventually turned, as it always did, to business. One of Richard's partners asked about Auraforge's latest expansion. I kept my answers modest, trying not to provide Eleanor with any ammunition. But Leo, bursting with pride, couldn't help himself. Clara was just recognized in Marketing Innovator magazine this month, he announced to the table. That's incredible, Sophie said. For someone self-taught, you've accomplished so much. Self-taught, Eleanor repeated, swirling the wine in her glass, the words slithering out. Yes, that's one way of putting it. Others might just say, uneducated. An immediate, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Forks stopped midway to mouths. Mom Leo warned, his voice low. What, it's a compliment to her resourcefulness, she said, feigning innocence. Not everyone needs a fancy degree to make a fortune off the internet these days. Later, when Sophie was talking about possibly starting her own design studio someday, I offered some gentle advice. Maybe build a client base on the side first, while you're still employed. That's how I started, building on evenings and weekends until I had enough momentum to make the leap. Oh, please, Eleanor interrupted her words, slurring together. She gestured at me with her wine glass. Sophie doesn't need business advice from someone who got lucky with social media. She has an actual education from a real university to fall back on. Mom, Sophie gasped, her face flushing red. What I'm just saying, there's a difference between a proper business background and whatever it is Clara does on Instagram all day. That was it. The breaking point. Leo put his fork down with a loud clatter. That's enough, Mom. Clara runs a multi-million-dollar company that employs over 50 people, including me. Her whatever on Instagram is revolutionizing an entire industry. Julian, the quiet brother whose medical bills I'd paid, even chimed in. And who paid for Sophie's design certificate or my medical bills last year, Clara did. The support, however, only enraged her further. It was gasoline on a fire. Eleanor's face went dark with fury. No one asked her to throw her money around if she's so desperate to buy her way into this family. Eleanor Richard warned, his voice sharp with command. No, she shouted, slamming her wine glass down so hard that red wine sloshed onto the white linen. I have held my tongue for 7 years. We have all had to sit here and pretend that my son didn't throw away his potential on some uneducated girl from the wrong side of town. Her voice rose with each word, raw and filled with years of stored-up poison. The room was deathly silent, the only sound her ragged breathing. And then came the betrayal that broke me. Sophie, the sister whose future I had funded, looked at her brother, her expression a mask of practiced concern. She's right, Leo, she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent table. This has gone on long enough. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing. That was the word that did it. Not the insults from the woman who had always hated me, but the casual, devastating betrayal from the girl I had helped. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It simply turned off. The part of me that cared, that tried that, hoped went cold and silent. Eleanor, fueled by her daughter's validation, went in for the kill. We've welcomed her, and what does she do? Flaunts her nouveau riche success like it somehow erases where she came from. Like it makes her one of us. She laughed a bitter, ugly sound. She'll never be one of us. She's uneducated trash who can't even give my son children. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Leo stood up so abruptly, his chair crashed backward onto the floor. Apologize to my wife. Now, he roared, his voice a thunder I had never heard before. But Eleanor just raised her chin defiantly. Why? So she can keep turning you all against me with her handouts. Get out, both of you. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with a triumphant hatred. Get out of our lives, you lowlife. The world seemed to stop. Walter was frozen, his face ashen. The other guests stared at their plates, and while Leo was still trembling with a rage that had taken 7 years to surface, I stood up slowly. A profound, chilling calm washed over me. I placed my cloth napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. Thank you for your honesty, Eleanor, I said, my voice even and clear. After all this time, it's refreshing to finally hear what you really think. Clara, wait, Leo pleaded, reaching for my arm. I pulled away gently. I'll get an Uber, I told him quietly, not meeting his eyes. You should stay. This is your family. As I walked out of that dining room, head held high, I heard her voice one last time. See, this is what she does. She turns him against me. The Uber ride home was a silent blur. It wasn't until I stepped into the quiet emptiness of our large house that the feeling finally hit me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was a pure, cleansing relief. The war was over because I was no longer fighting. I had surrendered the territory, and in doing so, I had just won my freedom. As I stood in the foyer, my phone buzzed in my hand. I expected a frantic text from Leo, but it wasn't him. It was a number I didn't recognize, a text from his father, Richard. It read, I'm sorry. Don't let them break you. Use the key. I stared at the screen. A new wave of confusion washing over me. The key, I whispered to the empty house. I had no idea what he meant. The key. The words echoed in my mind for the entire 6-hour flight, a cryptic counterpoint to the drone of the jet engines. Don't let them break you. Use the key. I had booked the first flight out of the city, a desperate escape to the one place I thought might be a sanctuary, the vacation home in Azure Cove that Leo and I had bought with the first truly staggering profits from Auraforge Media. It was meant to be our paradise, our refuge from the pressures of work. I never imagined I'd be fleeing there to seek refuge from our family. As the plane began its descent, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom announcing our arrival. Below the island emerged from the Pacific a slash of vibrant green and volcanic rock, ringed by impossible turquoise water. And for the first time in what felt like 7 years, I took a breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it for so long. The house welcomed me with the scent of salt and plumeria, its open-air design pulling the ocean breeze through the wide-open rooms. I dropped my bags, kicked off my shoes, and just stood there listening. No ticking clocks, no strained silences, no voices dripping with judgment. Only the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. For 3 days I engaged in a radical act of self-preservation. I did nothing. I swam in the ocean until my skin was pruned and my hair was stiff with salt. I walked for miles along the deserted beach, letting the waves wash over my feet as if they could physically pull the toxicity from my soul. I turned my phone off, severing the digital umbilical cord that connected me to the life I'd left behind. It was a detox, a slow, painful process of shedding the weight of Eleanor's disapproval and Sophie's betrayal. And in the quiet, my own thoughts began to surface, tentative at first, then with growing clarity. I wasn't just the girl from Millfield anymore. I wasn't just Leo's wife. I was the woman who had built an empire from nothing, and I had allowed them to make me feel worthless. On the 4th day, the mystery of Richard's text resurfaced. Use the key. What key? I started to search. It wasn't a frantic search, but a methodical one. I went through the kitchen drawers, the bedside tables, the closets. Nothing. Finally, I found myself in the small, sun-drenched office that overlooked the ocean, a room we rarely used. In the back of a large mahogany desk drawer, tucked beneath old stationery, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a small, ornate key, heavy and old-fashioned, with an intricate design on its head. It looked like something that belonged in a Victorian novel, completely out of place in our modern beach house. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was it. But what did it open a safe deposit box? It had to be. Just as I was contemplating this new mystery, the outside world came roaring back. I'd finally turned my phone on, and the barrage of missed calls and frantic texts from Leo was overwhelming. I decided to call him back. His voice was a torrent of relief and apology. Clara, oh my God, I was so worried. I'm so sorry. What she said was unforgivable. Dad is furious with her. Everyone is. I listened silently, letting him talk. He promised he'd make her apologize, that things would change, that he loved me. I believed he meant it, but I said very little. I just needed to hear his voice, and a part of me needed to believe him. The calls continued daily. By the end of the first week, the tone had already begun to shift. The frantic apologies were replaced with a strained impatience. The team really needs you for the Westfield presentation, Clara. He said, a subtle guilt trip woven into his words. I miss you. When are you thinking of coming home? The question felt like a trap. I'm not ready yet, Leo, I told him. He sighed, a sound heavy with frustration. After 10 days, the regression was complete. He was no longer my partner in this. He was his mother's diplomat. Mom wants to have us over for dinner, he said, an unmistakable edge of hope in his voice, to clear the air. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. No, Leo. Clara, please. She feels terrible. At some point, we have to move forward as a family. That was the line. That was the moment I saw the pattern with sickening clarity. He was the dutiful son smoothing over his mother's monstrous behavior, prioritizing the illusion of family harmony over his wife's spirit. We are not a family with your mother, Leo, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. We are a married couple that is forced to visit your toxic family. There is a profound difference. The fight that followed was the worst we'd ever had. It ended with him accusing me of being cruel and unforgiving, of punishing everyone for his mother's one mistake. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but my mind was perfectly frighteningly clear. The hope that he could change on his own, that he could truly break free from her orbit without a cataclysmic event, died in that phone call. He would always choose the path of least resistance. He would always choose to manage her, which meant sacrificing me. I stood up from the lanai, where I'd been watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it was almost painful in its contrast to the ugliness of our conversation. I walked inside my steps, deliberate. I picked up my phone. I made 2 calls. The first was to my corporate lawyer, a shark of a woman who had negotiated my last 2 company acquisitions. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I need to understand my options, all of them." The second call was to the local branch of the First Hawaiian Bank. "Hello," I said. "I have a key to a safe deposit box, but the account isn't in my name. I need to know the protocol for accessing it." After the calls, I walked back outside. The last sliver of sun had vanished, leaving behind a sky of deep indigo. For the first time since that horrible dinner, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't happiness, it was resolve. The unraveling was over. It was time to start pulling on the threads. The next morning, I drove to the bank in town, the ornate key feeling heavy in my pocket. What I was about to find in that box would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire Vance family. It was a stack of documents, and a letter addressed to me in Richard's handwriting. I sat in my rental car in the bank's parking lot for a long time, the engine off, the air conditioning blasting against the humid Hawaiian air. The thick folder of documents lay on the passenger seat, feeling heavier than a tombstone. Richard's letter was on top, his elegant, sharp handwriting, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions churning inside me. For years, his father-in-law had been quietly building an escape route, siphoning assets from the family business, establishing trusts. Eleanor couldn't touch creating a financial lifeboat for himself. The key wasn't just for a safe deposit box, it was the key to his own gilded cage, and the letter made it clear he wanted to partner with me. Me, the girl his wife called trash. He saw me not as a threat, but as an ally, an equal. Just as I was trying to process the sheer magnitude of this revelation, a car pulled into the spot next to me. My head snapped up. It was Leo. He looked exhausted, rumpled, and desperate. He must have taken the red-eye. He got out of his car and walked to my window, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. He followed me back to the house in silence. He dropped his suitcase in the entryway, the sound echoing in the airy space. The confrontation I had been dreading was finally here, but the ground had shifted beneath us. I was no longer the one on trial. "I couldn't go another day without seeing you," he began, his voice raw. "I'm not leaving without you." I looked at him, truly, looked at him, and felt a wave of pity for the man caught in a trap he hadn't even known existed. I walked to the large teak coffee table and placed the folder on its surface. "You might be leaving alone," I said, my voice devoid of anger. It was just a statement of fact. He came over expecting me to fight, to cry, to demand an apology. Instead, I just nodded at the folder. "Richard sent me a key." Leo's brow furrowed in confusion. I opened the folder and laid out the first few pages: bank statements, trust agreements, property deeds. I watched his face as he began to read. I saw the progression of emotion, confusion, then dawning comprehension, then a wave of disbelief so profound it made him physically stagger back and sink into an armchair. He read his father's letter, his hands shaking. He saw the years of careful planning, the silent rebellion of a man living under the thumb of a matriarch who controlled everything. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about the systemic dysfunction of his entire family. The revelation that his strong, stoic father was just as desperate to escape Eleanor as I was shattered something in him. The lifelong conditioning, the ingrained need to please his mother, the role of peacemaker, it all crumbled to dust in the face of this stark, undeniable proof. He wasn't choosing between his wife and his mother. He was realizing the entire system was a prison. For a long time, he just sat there, his head in his hands. When he finally looked up, the arrogance, the impatience, the frustration I had heard on the phone were gone. All that was left was a raw, gaping wound. "All this time," he whispered. "He's been trapped too." "We all have," I said softly. This was our reckoning. The painful, messy, necessary tearing down of a rotten foundation. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, Leo," I told him, "and a therapist." for me. The next video session is tomorrow. You're welcome to join. That first therapy session was brutal. He was defensive, I was guarded. We were two strangers trying to find our way back to a marriage we weren't even sure still existed. But our therapist was skilled, and she gently guided us through the wreckage. The second session brought the breakthrough. She helped him see the pattern not as individual fights, but as a system of emotional abuse he had been conditioned to enable. Your role as the family peacemaker, she explained, required a sacrifice, and the person you were always expected to sacrifice was Clara. Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. The realization hit him hard. In our third session, we stopped talking about the past and started talking about the future, about what healthy boundaries would even look like. It was the first time in a long time that it felt like we were building a partnership, not just surviving a crisis. A week into his stay, Eleanor called. Leo looked at me, then at his phone, and did something he'd never done before. He put it on speaker. Her voice, syrupy and manipulative, filled the quiet living room. Leo, darling, I was just calling to see when you were bringing Clara home. I may have been a bit harsh the other night. I was only concerned about your future. 7 years into our marriage, and you're still concerned about my future with her? I asked calmly, the question hanging in the air. Well, you know what I mean. Family is important, she purred. Yes, it is, I agreed. Which is why I won't subject myself or Leo to your disrespect anymore. Her tone chilled instantly. So that's how it's going to be. You're taking my son away to your island paradise, cutting him off from his family. Before I could respond, Leo stepped in. His voice was quiet, but it held a core of steel I had never heard before. No one is cutting anyone off, Mom. But things are going to be different going forward. He took a breath. Clara deserves genuine respect, not tolerance. I've always respected, she began. No, you haven't. Leo interrupted, his voice unshakable. You haven't. And until you can acknowledge that and make real meaningful changes, we will be keeping our distance. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was simply stating a new law of physics. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She eventually stammered a goodbye and hung up. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw the man I had first fallen in love with. The one who saw value where others didn't. He looked exhausted, but also free. Thank you for that, I whispered. He took my hands in his grip firm. It's long overdue, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And you were right. This was never just about one dinner. It was about years of disrespect that I allowed to continue because it was easier than confronting her. I'm so sorry, Clara, for all of it. That night we made a decision. Azure Cove wouldn't be a vacation home anymore. It would be our primary residence, our sanctuary. We would accept Richard's offer and form a new partnership, a new venture on our own terms. I looked at the antique locket that still hung around my neck, a symbol of the past I came from, of the spirit that had kept me going. Then I looked at the ornate safe deposit box key on the table, a symbol of the future I was now claiming, of the power I had earned. For the first time, they didn't feel like they belonged to two different worlds. With Leo finally truly by my side, they felt like they belonged together. That decision made in the quiet aftermath of the storm wasn't just about moving. It was about choosing a new beginning on our own terms. The antique locket, a symbol of my past, and the safe deposit box key, a symbol of my power, no longer felt like they belonged to two different people. With Leo truly by my side, they finally felt like they belonged together, part of the same story. A year later, that story was one I barely recognized in the best possible way. Our lives settled into the natural rhythm of the island. We ran the now thriving West Coast division of Auraforge Media from our home office, where the sound of the ocean was a constant calming soundtrack to our video calls. Leo, no longer a conflicted peacekeeper, but a true partner, flourished in his role, his corporate experience providing the perfect strategic ballast to my creative vision. We were a team in work and in life, a partnership forged in fire. Richard, our silent and now very happy partner, had found his own escape. He visited often, a lighter, more relaxed version of the man I'd first met. his conversations filled with excitement about new ventures instead of quiet warnings about his wife. The rest of the family found their way into our new world, too. Sophie and Julian visited regularly, their relationships with us strengthening without Eleanor's constant interference. They were excited to experience our new life, and in this neutral territory, we were just family. But the true test, the final echo of the old war, came 6 months after we made our move permanent. Eleanor agreed to a visit. She stepped off the plane into the humid air of Azure Cove, not as a queen arriving to inspect her territory, but as a guest. She was subdued, almost tentative. Our home, with its stunning ocean views and airy open design, seemed to humble her in a way our success in her world never could. She had no power here. The intricate social rules of Sterling Hills meant nothing against the backdrop of a volcano and the endless Pacific. The visit was civil but tense, a carefully choreographed dance around years of unspoken pain. Eleanor was on her best behavior, the blatant hostility replaced by a cautious, watchful quiet. Whether this came from a place of genuine growth or simply the stark realization that she had lost all control over our choices, I couldn't tell. And honestly, I found I didn't much care. On their last evening, as Leo and Richard grilled fresh fish on the lanai, the scent mixing with the salty air, Eleanor found me in the kitchen. She watched me for a moment as I sliced a pineapple. "I'll never understand it," she said, her voice holding the familiar faint edge of judgment. "How someone with your background has been so successful." The old Clara would have been wounded. The old Clara would have felt the need to justify herself, to list her achievements, to prove her worth. But the woman standing in that kitchen was different. I found myself looking at her not with hurt, but with a profound sense of pity for her limited perspective. I put down the knife, wiped my hands, and walked over to her. Without a word, I unclasped the antique silver locket from my neck. It was the one piece of my past I had never taken off. She watched confused as I carefully opened the small hinged oval. She expected a picture, I think. A tiny photo of Leo, or perhaps my parents. But there was no picture. Instead, nestled inside was a tiny yellowed square of paper folded so many times the creases were permanent. My fingers, steady and sure, unfolded it and held it out for her to see. On it, in my grandmother's elegant, faded script, were 6 simple words. "Your worth is not for others to decide." Eleanor stared at the words, her mouth slightly agape. She looked from the paper to my face, searching for an explanation. That's how I said softly. Something shifted in her expression then. Not acceptance, not quite. But maybe, just maybe, the first tiny crack in a rigid worldview that had imprisoned her for her entire life. It was enough. Looking back, I realized that Eleanor's cruel outburst that horrible night was actually a gift. A painful, terribly wrapped gift, but a gift nonetheless. It was the catalyst we needed. It forced us to confront the toxic patterns we had been maintaining for the sake of a hollow family harmony. My journey taught me about business, yes, but my journey with Leo's family taught me about self-respect. Financial success means nothing if you spend it trying to buy the approval of people who are determined to withhold it. True wealth isn't measured in stock valuations or the square footage of your house. It's the wealth you can't deposit in a bank. It's found in the quiet peace of a morning walk on the beach. It's found in a partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering support. It's found in the courage to build boundaries that protect your spirit, even if it means walking away from the life everyone expected you to want. If you're in a situation like mine, if you feel like your achievements are constantly being minimized and your worth is always up for debate, please remember this: you have choices. You do not have to keep accepting treatment that diminishes you, regardless of family ties or history. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's the ultimate act of self-preservation, and it's necessary for your well-being and for the health of every relationship you have. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever had to make that impossible choice between keeping the peace and respecting yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below, and if you found any value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about building a life and a business on your own terms. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see your worth. Your future self will thank you for it.